Welcome to the Digital Knowledge Transfer Podcast. An area that has become more and more prevalent in the digital world is learning management systems, LMSs, or platforms to enable self-learning online rather than classroom-based learning. This has become a huge area. It's growing rapidly in terms of its complexity, in terms of its advancement, and indeed in how AI is interfacing with this area. Now, my guest today to talk about this area is Kevin McDermott. So Kevin is a journalist, author, editor, and content creator of 30 plus years experience, I would say at this point. He's been editor of a number of national newspapers here in Ireland, but he's also done a lot of work internationally and particularly in the Middle East, which is where we first came across each other, actually, Kevin. So Kevin, welcome to Studio 92. Weather a little bit different to the Middle East today, I think, yeah?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And yes, it is. Although it's always good, at least there isn't a mile high wall of red sand blowing towards us. So be thankful for small mercies.
Yeah. So look, before we get into the whole areas of LMSs, why don't we talk just a little bit about you, about your background, because you really have a very rich background in terms of journalism, and it's that essentially has led you to the direction of being essentially an educator.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, my own background is very much in content creation. So I started out as a journalist with The Independent and worked as an Northern editor for Ireland on Sunday back in the days before there was a Northern peace process and so on and so forth, and kind of moved really onwards from that into actually launched at one point the country's first computer games magazines. So I was kind of always very interested in how you use.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah.
I'm learning something more about you all the time.
Well, there might be one or two people out there that still remember the Player or the official Irish PlayStation magazine.
Okay, there you go.
So yeah, I guess it was always very much to the fore, the idea of words, but then how that interacts with video, audio, and then obviously with the games end of things, how you can use gamification to tell stories.
Yeah.
So all of that, I guess, in the world where the world has brought us ever since, which is mobile, internet, digital, everything has sort of come together to create this digital ecosphere in which education became a fairly natural progression for me.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked in the intro about learning management systems. I mean, maybe from somebody who is pretty much an authority in that area, you might explain in simple terms, what is an online learning management system?
Well, an LMS, to use the acronym to go down the jargon road, LMS really, it can be viewed as a number of things, a digital online platform. Really, though, what it comes back down to is it's how education, how training is delivered. And traditionally, you've had the classroom, which was very much anchored to one teacher, one group of students, one location. But with the advent of the digital world, it becomes now, how can you roll that educational system, that ecosphere out to hundreds of different countries, thousands, millions of students at one time. And there are lots of points of evolution in the history of LMSs, but really that's what it breaks down to. It's how you're going to deliver education training to students or employees or customers or individuals.
Sure. And look, there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of different LMSs out there. Some are off the shelf, some are bespoke. And we're not going to talk about any individual LMS today. That's not the point of the podcast. But again, in broad terms, what sort of advantages would digital LMSs offer over traditional ways of learning?
I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is flexibility. There has been, by necessity, a history of one size fits all for educators or publishers or trainers when they come to people. People were limited by location, by communication channels, so on and so forth. But with the advent of LMSs, you can incorporate everything in one location. So you've got everything from video to audio to text to PDFs to interactive learning. All of that can be accommodated within one sphere, and it can be rolled out to one person, or it can be scaled up to thousands of people, depending on the company or the individual or the school's needs.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talk about a lot in the digital marketing world is personalization. So if you're an advertiser, you can target people based on their online behavior or based on machine learning. But I think this is one of the things as well that LMSs offer, that there's much greater degree of personalization afforded by those type of platforms.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with LMSs, what you're really talking about is, I worked in the educational publishing sphere, and we were building LMSs. What they give you is they give you an insight into the individual. So typically, a few years ago, we were building interactive comprehension quizzes or comprehension questions. So what would happen is, if it was being done online, done digitally, the program would track what the answers were. It would identify the correct answers, the wrong answers. It would correct where the candidate was strong, where they were weak, and the idea then would be that the teacher could examine the findings and could differentiate the learning. So either make the learning process easier or harder, depending on how strong or how not as strong the candidate might be. And that really probably is the origins of what we're talking about with LMSs now, that they can be targeted. The technology, the ability to analyze the data at the back end of the program, the back end of the application, is so much more intense now, is so much more capable now, that you can get a real insight into what if you've got 10,000 students or 20,000 students across any particular educational region or zone, and they're using the same LMS, you can drill down, in theory, you can drill down with this automated system into the needs of one student. And if the adaptive learning process is done properly, then the program itself should be able to identify how to help that student overcome a particular challenge or problem, or indeed how to extend their knowledge already by creating more difficult questions or exercises. And that, in a sense, that's the basis of where the personalized learning program is. That then becomes, from a school point of view, that then becomes much more relevant to things like business or a work industry placement, because what you can do is you can use those same ideas, those same philosophies to identify where a particular worker may have a skills gap, and then how do you bridge that gap? How do you help your worker to become empowered to improve in what they're doing and cover that gap? So that's really what we're talking about.
And I want to talk about, how those sort of gaps are identified and what, just go into a bit more of the detail of that. But just bringing it back then to some of the different tools that learning management systems that use. I mean, typically we'd have things like podcasts, like videos, like polls, like interactive features. You've got a whole plethora of different tools that can be used online to gather data and to make a learning environment much more rich for groups, and I mentioned groups as well, because it's not just the individual, it's the fact that these tools can be used to have a forum-based learning approach, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you can go from when someone within the educational sphere with our LMS, what would have happened was when someone entered the application, the program, the platform, they would have undergone a diagnostic, what we would call the diagnostic task, which would have identified where they are in a particular subject matter, program, whatever it might be, and then based on that, they would get they would have a learning path designed for them that would take them through the year. Now, by the end of the year, they would still have to get to whatever the target was at the end of the year, but between the start and the end point, it becomes much more about how do they get there, how do they engage, how do you motivate them, how do you encourage them to do that. And a lot of what you're talking about in terms of the interaction, the rest of it, a lot of that comes back to that idea of making it interesting for people, moving away from simply a 2D black and white piece of text that they may have, no concept of, they have no relation to, there's no context for whatever it is they're learning. So what the digital can do is it can make that much more interesting. So as you say, you can, to illustrate various points, you can have video, you can have audio, but a lot of the stuff that I've been looking at most recently is gamification, and how do you really engage with people, and this what I specialize in, which is, I guess, young teenage boys, which are notoriously hard market to engage. How do you get their attention? How do you engage with them? And you've got to take something that has elements of fun, you've got to take elements of the real world, so that there's context in what they do, they can relate that to it. But at the same time, they also have to be learning something. There has to be a set of standards there.
Gamification, I want to come back to that, because that's a really interesting topic in itself. But just talking about the personalized degree or the personalized nature of learning that LMS creates, that must make teaching because obviously we still have teachers and we still have real people behind the LMSs, but it must make the teaching process so much more efficient if you've got the data and machine learning coming in to sort of identify these skills gaps, identify weaknesses, sort of point out the direction in which it's going to be most efficient to take certain students. I'm imagining that must be fantastic for educators to have all this, and it makes their job much more efficient and effective.
Yeah, I mean, that I think is one of the key drivers behind LMS is it's the idea that it takes a lot of the bureaucracy and administration out of the remit of the individual teacher, or even the individual principal, so that they can concentrate on the quality of the teaching. At the same time, what the best LMSs will also do is they will have a huge pool of resources, possibly created by the LMS developers themselves, or as you touched on before, the idea of these communities and these forums where you've got thousands of teachers, thousands of individuals are coming together to share their experiences and their stories, and many occasions to upload what it is that has worked for them in the classroom, what it is has worked for them in a particular set of circumstances, so that other people can work with that as well and use that. So you've got, in a sense, there's this personalized approach to it all, but if they're done well, you've also got this massive community aspect to it as well, which is motivational, I think, as well for the teachers as well as for the students. And
that leads me on to another question, which is just in terms of the forum learning. But that forum learning must apply to teachers as well. I mean, the LMS ecosystem, if you like, must create an environment whereby a teacher might say, hey, this has really worked for me. So it has, and has shared that knowledge across, a group of teachers, as opposed to getting information from groups of students. So I guess it creates, it creates better teachers as well.
I think so. And one of the things certainly that I've noticed in terms of that idea of teacher collaboration is that a teacher may be teaching a particular subject.
Teacher collaboration, that's basically the concept here, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's interesting because, you talk about 21st century skills for our young people to learn. So communication, collaboration, all that sort of stuff, but actually critical thinking. But actually what you're doing with all of the LMSs is that you're taking the skill sets that we want our young people to learn, and you're actually just taking that upriver and applying that to their parents and the next generations, the people who went before, because a lot of them didn't get that kind of training. And in terms of, we're talking about teachers and students right now, but a lot of what companies are using LMSs for is to train their own people, not just in the practical applications or technical aspects of the job, but they're also training them in things like soft skills. How do they communicate? How do they be part of a team? So, it's interesting, I think, that you're taking a new concept and they say you can't, teach an old dog new tricks, but I think LMSs, if they're done well, are proving that's not the case.
Yeah. So let's go back to gamification. Okay, a term that any of us in digital will have heard of, and I think we all kind of think we know what it means, you know. But I think in the LMS world, this is where it's definitely been used as a proactive learning tool, as a proactive learning technique, if you like. So, big question for you: does gamification work?
I think it depends.
And let me
there's a touch of the
that,
curate's egg about my answer, but
that question, okay,
yeah,
and that's a very broad brush question, is because in the digital marketing world, there's a lot of gamification takes place, and you'll see people thinking that it's very cool, that, you know, okay, it looks good, you know, it's fun to create, you know, gamified systems, but, you know, at the end of the day, you know, what's the point of it? And this is where I think in the learning management systems area, this is where I think you probably get a real insight in terms of how, if and how it actually is effective or not.
I think there are probably two answers to that. Well, I guess one in that it depends on what you want the outcome to be. The outcome can be, do you want someone to, whatever they're learning, whatever they're being trained in, do you want them to improve? That's one aspect of it. And then the second aspect is, do you have a set of criteria, or do you have a goal that they must reach? So gamification can help you do both, but I think you have to be very clear about what it is you want to achieve. There are a lot of, particularly in schools, there are a lot of young people who, you know, for whatever reason, can't learn in the traditional way, which is, you know, we all remember, you know, dusters being thrown across the classrooms and bits of chalk and all the rest of it.
You might be old enough to remember that. Not everyone remembers that.
You know, and learning by rote, you know, and certainly, you know, that's one way to do it. But we've evolved somewhat since then. Now we're facing a whole range of new challenges, special needs within the classroom, and that can be, you know, it can range from severe needs through to, you know, somebody just simply needs more revision in what they're doing. What games can do is I think they provide a different setting for a lot of this. They can range from quizzes through to, you're talking about polls and surveys, but, you know, they can be interactive quizzes, they can be multiple choice questions, they can be matching questions. Mm-hmm. There's a whole range of different types of questions that, again, individually will give you feedback on how a particular student is doing, or how a particular student is taking in the information and what they're doing with it. But then at the other end, that it ranges out to, you know, the idea of, you know, full-blown. I've seen some games companies, you know, who've launched games that maybe haven't quite hit the sales figures that they'd hoped, and suddenly they're segueing and promoting their you know, not so great game as a learning tool. So some of it can be very ropey, some of it can be very tenuous. For me, I think that if done properly, games are the best way to engage with people. And I don't necessarily just mean, you know, teenage boys. I'm talking about, you know, students, but I'm also talking about adults as well. We've done, in the past, we've done engagements with huge multinationals that are training, you know, Asian people to work in the petroleum industry or some of the other industries. We train them in language, and again, comes back to a lot of the best resources, best feedback we had was off the back of gamification. It can't be complicated. There has to be a measure of control. It's, without jumping ahead to the AI end of things, AI has the potential to be very exciting in this. But for me personally, at the minute, I'm much more in favor of adaptive learning, which at the minute is, that's basically you're adapting whatever a student is learning to what their strengths are. Yeah. So it's a bit more of a controlled environment. Whereas with AI at the moment, nobody really controls it. So we've been, in my own work, we've been playing around with it recently, and it's a lot of fun. It's very exciting, but it has its major flaws, as people know, people talk about. But it's the idea that while it can give an individual tremendous personalized learning paths. I mean, you can take a basic exercise, and you can, by incorporating AI, you can have that same exercise changed 1,000 times. But the problem is, at the end of it, what have they learned that 1,000 times? Who's really controlling the AI? So I think within education and within training, there has to be a very clearly defined outcome at the end of this. Otherwise, well, it's not so much that there'll be chaos, but at the same time, you're not going to help your students get from where they start to where they need to be.
Yeah, and look, as we've arrived on the topic of AI, and this was something we were always going to talk about, if we think about the AI tools out there, and if we take a real obvious one, which is ChatGPT, and we see how that could, for example, be applied to the journalism world, for example. Initially, everybody thought, great, we don't need journalists, so we don't need copywriters anymore. And after some time in testing it, it was realized, well, it actually makes quite a lot of mistakes. At the same time, it's a good resource tool insofar as it can save a bit of efficiency. So there still needs to be an overseer, I think, for AI, for that example. In the education world, are you seeing the same type of thing? Are you seeing that AI is being used in LMSs, but still with caution and with if you like, a sort of a human eye over it?
Well, I think with AI, I mean, we've known for some time that it's coming, but it's only really exploded since probably the start of 2023. So certainly everybody, most of the companies out there, a lot of the companies out there that are producing LMSs, whether it be for the educational market or whether it be for the corporate world or individual training world, everybody's talking about, machine learning and how AI has been incorporated into what they're doing. It's a lot less clear as to exactly how they're incorporating it and what's happening. I think it's too early to judge. I know that's sort of kicking the ball high in the air, but yeah. I think it's too early to judge what impact it's having. Without doubt, it is here to stay. And so I think from a more personal point of view, it becomes, how do you react to that? What do you do with that? And we're talking about the world of journalism. It's, I think certainly there are going to be people out there that will use ChatGPT to write their articles, whatever else. I think that will get you so far. But if you simply leave it to produce on its own, I think you're going to have a lot of flawed content. So you are, in one sense, going to need to have the gatekeepers there that can fact check, so on and so forth. I would imagine, though, that as AI evolves, it's going to get better. You're going to have various AI possibly acting as gatekeepers on other AI, so on and so forth. But from a human point of view right now, from a personal point of view right now, the way that I would treat something like ChatGPT is as I would have worked in journalism, which is as a source. If you wrote a story and you were worth your salt as a journalist, then you'd back it up with another source. You'd have a couple of sources. You could have 3 sources. It's the same with ChatGPT. That it's a great tool, but you can't put your entire faith in it. Certainly not at the moment, anyway. Yeah. And I think that's the pattern we're seeing across all industries as well. So bringing it away from AI and back to the sort of the whole LMS area, and we've talked about it in education. We touched up on how it's being used in business. And I want to talk, Kevin, a little bit about that now, because certainly in our own industry, in the digital marketing world, there is more of a movement towards, rather than providing digital marketing services, to actually educating people in business to be able to plan and execute their own digital marketing, and in fact, that was one of the concepts behind this podcast when we originally came up with it, So have you seen more engagement in the business world using LMSs to train staff, to create systems where people can learn and get accredited, that type of thing? That's happening a lot, I think, as well. And LMSs are key in that world. Yeah, I think actually, some of the best LMSs, some of the most exciting developments have been as a result of business engagement with LMSs. So, typically, previously businesses, if you were a large company, you may have had a requirement to train your employees. So everybody coming into work in a warehouse, was handed the company handbook, given a tour, and that was it. And somehow you were supposed to, imbibe the company culture, become motivated, fully functioning member of staff. Things moved on, and I can remember Dublin in the 90s. The cutting edge would have been made up of companies who were using PowerPoint presentations and sending them around the world to the various offices or operations of some multinational company. Now, with the advent of LMSs, you can have a standardized training program, standardized on one level in that it can deliver the company message to employees, it can deliver a standard company training to each employee. But what it also can do now is it can, in the same way that we're doing in the education sector, it can identify weaknesses, it can identify strengths, it can potentially project a career path for an individual within a company, but also equally it can identify skills gaps. And once you've identified those skills gaps, the LMS can recommend how those gaps can be addressed, how they can be filled. You've got that, that goes then from, it goes to things like training fast. We were talking about AI, not to get back into it, but the speed of development now within companies is huge. So typically you may have a new piece of software coming online, could be every year, could be every 2 years, could be every 6 months. But you may need, multiple people on multiple locations to be able to work with that piece of software within 6 months, within a month. So what LMSs will do is they'll allow you to set up that training program. You can have people working intensely on training, being trained on something for a month or for a week or whatever else. And once they've done that, then you can look at, they call micro badging them, which is, giving them accreditation.
This is the accreditation piece, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And this is what everyone wants now through LMSs, is to actually have courses which are somehow accredited. Yeah,
I mean, again, it comes back to the idea that, how do you establish credibility for that accreditation? So, typically would have done our O levels, A levels, or leaving cert, whatever it might have been, or degrees, and you would have spent, X number of years studying for that at a recognizable institute, or if it was a business qualification, similarly, you might have done a year, but you would have received that accreditation from a respectable, well-known, revered institute. The problem now is that for a lot of the new industries coming on stream, AI itself, what scenario, what environment is that going to throw up now? With the idea that we're talking about whether writers may be, replaced by something like a chat GPT, or indeed they're looking at, is this the end of coders in the development world as well, with the onset of AI being able to, code entire programs. With those things coming into mind, we're now talking, or the talk out there now is that we need less journalists or writers or marketeers or coders or whatever it might be, or doctors possibly, or lawyers, and what we need are AI prompt engineers. So the idea being that, if you can ask the right questions, if you can frame the instructions properly, AI will deliver whatever you need promptly and more succinctly than a human would. But then, we're now talking about prompt engineers within 6 months of AI really coming on the scene and wowing the rest of the world. But how do you know if your prompt engineer is actually, an expert at what they do, or if it's just somebody that has, scribbled down, I'm a prompt engineer, on a bit of paper at home, and, So, that's really what we're talking about is, how are we going to stand over the accreditation that we have?
Yeah. Well, and again, that, we talk about prompt engineers, and it's a job that you see now, floated around, and you raise a very good point, which is what is an AI prompt engineer? How do you qualify to get one? But it goes back to the whole area of qualification and accreditation. And I think that's one of the areas where LMSs are very going to much evolve into. So you've got LMSs, but you've got the accreditation associated with them as well. That's going to get more and more important. And what we see in our work is that people are asking for certificates now. They're asking for badges, and particularly in your work in the Middle East, where to get a certificate or a badge is extremely important. You would see that a lot, and I guess that was something that. In your line of work, Kevin, you've seen the importance of that and how that can be used to further careers.
Yeah, I mean, it really, it comes back to, I think, how relevant these things are. As you say, in the Middle East, you almost got a certificate, and it could be said of the same thing happened in this country as well, that you got a certificate or a piece of paper with your name on it if you turned up to the opening of an envelope.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's a big element of that. But I think, to take a step backwards, it's what's happening with AI now is, I think, certainly what happened in my own industry in journalism, with the advent of the internet, which is that you had a shattering of the industry as it was. A lot of the legacy publishers, which were the trusted publishers, if you like, back then, don't carry the same weight as they do now. I think that we're probably on the cusp of the same thing happening with universities. I think universities are going to face an increasing difficulty in proving their relevance to this generation going forward. You can already see that there's an awful lot of students saying, well, why do I need to pay here at the minute €3,000 a year or €10,000 a year to study a 3-year program that when I come out is going to be out of date, or possibly I'll need to specialize and do a postgrad that'll cost me another 10,000-20,000. Why am I doing all of that when it's not going to be relevant to the industry as
Absolutely. And even if I take our own area, which is digital marketing, I mean, if somebody comes to our company with their CV and they said, we've done a digital marketing degree, if they've done that 3 months ago, there's going to be bits on it that are out of date, and I think that applies to lots of different subjects as well. And then just when you talk about university, the other thing is that universities obviously recognize this because they're turning into businesses now in terms of selling courses to adult learners. You can do like an MBA online, for example, these days, but you pay quite a lot of money for it, But it's the whole area is fascinating, I think, and I think we could talk about it all day. So Kevin, last question. I mean, you as a expert in this area, we see that the LMSs have really come on in the last 10 years and there's so many different ones, and they can do so many different things. If I'm sitting here talking to you in 3 to 5 years' time, where do you think we're going to be? And I know that's a big question and nobody really knows, but what do you think?
I think there are certain trends that we're on the cusp of right now that we'll see the further development of, which is augmented reality, virtual reality. But really, how far LMSs can go will be down to, how much imagination the creators have, what the market requires from them as well, because that's a massive part of this. Is it's feedback from the users, whether that be students, whether it be parents of students, or whether it be companies or individuals. They're going to be the ones that are driving this going forward. From all of our point of view, I think though the key phrase in all of this is adaptability, is flexibility. We have to adapt. That's what it's going to be.
And I think adaptability and the willingness to engage in what's new and upcoming out there is key. On that, Kevin, thanks very much for coming in today. Really appreciate the chat and the insights. Watch this space in terms of LMSs and where it goes. Thanks very much all.